I, 28, F, stood near the towering cake, a confection of white frosting and sugar flowers that seemed to mock the sour taste in my mouth. My wedding dress, a cloud of lace and tulle I had once felt like a queen in, now felt like a costume for a part I no longer understood. The music from the band washed over the reception hall, a wave of cheerful noise that couldn't drown out the single, sharp sentence rattling in my head. A few minutes ago, my new sister-in-law, Amelia, had brushed past me. Her smile was as bright and brittle as spun sugar. She had pressed a small, folded piece of paper into my hand, her fingers cold against my skin. "A little something for the bride," she had whispered, her voice a conspiratorial purr. Before melting back into the crowd of laughing, dancing guests, I had unfolded it in the relative privacy of a floral arrangement, my heart thumping with a vague sense of dread. Amelia had never been my biggest fan. Throughout my engagement to her brother, Mark, 30, M, she had treated me with a kind of polite disdain, a series of backhanded compliments and thinly veiled jabs that I had always tried to ignore. I told myself she was just protective of her older brother. I told myself she would warm up to me eventually. But the note wasn't warm. It was a sliver of ice. In elegant looping cursive, it said, "He loved her first." Just 4 words. 4 words that were meant to gut me on the happiest day of my life. I read them again and again. He loved her first. Who was her? Mark had told me about his past girlfriends. There were a few, none of them serious. He had always painted his romantic history as a series of casual, short-lived things that ended amicably. He'd said, with a sincerity that had made my heart swell, that I was the first woman he had ever truly loved, the first one he could imagine spending his life with. Was that a lie? I looked across the dance floor where Mark was laughing with his groomsmen, his face alight with joy. He looked so happy, so untroubled. He caught my eye and gave me a wide, goofy grin, blowing a kiss. My stomach twisted. Was his happiness real? Was ours? I felt a chill despite the warmth of the crowded room. The note felt heavy in my hand, a piece of evidence from a crime I hadn't known was committed. I scanned the room for Amelia. I saw her near the bar, chatting with one of our cousins. She glanced in my direction, and her perfect smile widened just a fraction. She knew I'd read it. She was watching me, waiting for my reaction, waiting for me to fall apart. I refused to give her the satisfaction. I folded the note carefully, tucking it into the small satin bag that hung from my wrist. I would not let her ruin this day. I forced a smile onto my face and started walking toward my husband, each step feeling heavier than the last. I needed to pretend everything was fine. For tonight, at least, I had to be the happy bride everyone expected me to be. But the question echoed with every beat of the music. Who was she? The rest of the reception passed in a blur of forced smiles and hollow congratulations. I danced with my father, my new father-in-law, and of course with Mark. When he held me close during our first dance, his hand warm on the small of my back, I leaned my head against his shoulder and breathed in his familiar scent. "Are you happy?" he whispered into my hair. I wanted to scream, "Who is she?" Instead, I tilted my head back and said, "Of course, I've never been happier." It was the first lie of our marriage, and it felt like a stone in my throat. I watched Amelia over Mark's shoulder. She was watching us, a smug, knowing look on her face. She had planted a seed of poison, and now she was waiting for it to sprout. I managed to hold it together through the cake cutting, the bouquet toss, and the endless photos. But as the night started to wind down and guests began to leave, the facade I had so carefully constructed started to crack. I felt a desperate need to escape, to be alone, to think. I made my excuses to Mark, telling him I needed to touch up my makeup, and fled to the bridal suite that the venue had provided. The room was quiet and cool. My normal clothes were laid out on the bed, a silent promise of the end of this strange theatrical day. I sank onto the plush sofa, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the noise of the party downstairs. I pulled the note from my bag and stared at it again. He loved her first. The elegant script seemed to mock me. My hands were trembling. Was my entire relationship a lie? Had Mark been thinking of someone else when he proposed to me? When he said his vows just a few hours ago? The thought was a physical pain, a sharp stabbing in my chest. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, hot and angry. I wouldn't cry. I would not let Amelia win. But the confusion and hurt were overwhelming. I didn't know what to believe. My Mark, the kind, honest man I had fallen in love with, couldn't be capable of such a deep deception. Could he? The doubt was a bitter pill. I was so lost in my turmoil that I didn't hear the door open. Clara, are you okay? It was Chloe, my maid of honor and my best friend since kindergarten. She came into the room, her own bridesmaid dress slightly askew, a look of concern on her face. You've been up here for a while. I was getting worried. I tried to pull myself together, to wipe the distress from my face. I'm fine, I said, my voice shaky. Just needed a minute away from the crowd. Chloe wasn't buying it. She sat down next to me on the sofa, her expression gentle. Talk to me, she said softly. What's wrong? Did someone say something? Was it Amelia? Her guess was so accurate it startled me. I looked at her, and the dam of my composure finally broke. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I handed her the note without a word. Chloe took it, her brow furrowing in confusion. She read the 4 words and then read them again. I watched her face, searching for some kind of answer. Her expression shifted from confusion to a slow, dawning horror. Her eyes widened, and she looked up at me, a new kind of pity in her gaze that made my stomach clench. Oh, Clara, she whispered. I think I know who her is. My heart stopped. I had been hoping she would tell me it was just a cruel, meaningless prank, but the look on her face told me it was real. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Who is it? Chloe hesitated, chewing on her lower lip. She looked torn, as if she was debating whether to tell me. Chloe, please, I begged. You have to tell me. What do you know? She took a deep breath, her gaze steady on mine. I think she's talking about Laura, she said. The name meant nothing to me. Laura? I repeated. Who is Laura? Chloe's expression was grim. Mark's ex-girlfriend, she said, from before he met you. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. An ex-girlfriend. Of course. Amelia was just being petty, trying to make me feel insecure about someone from Mark's past. Oh, I said, a shaky laugh escaping my lips. Is that all? He told me about her. Laura. They dated for a few months in college, right? He said it was nothing serious. I looked at Chloe, expecting her to share my relief, but she wasn't smiling. She was looking at me with that same expression of deep, sorrowful pity. My own smile faltered. Chloe? What is it? Her silence was more terrifying than any words could have been. He told you it was nothing serious? She finally asked, her voice soft and full of a terrible weight. Yes, I said, my throat suddenly dry. He said it was a long time ago and didn't mean anything. Chloe shook her head slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. Clara, she said, and the way she said my name made my blood run cold. He lied to you. It wasn't a few months. They were together for 5 years. They lived together. Everyone, his entire family, all his friends. They all thought Mark and Laura were going to get married. The world tilted on its axis. The quiet bridal suite seemed to shrink around me, the air growing thin and hard to breathe. 5 years. Not a few months. 5 years. They lived together. They were going to get married. The words echoed in the silent space between us, each one a hammer blow against the foundation of my relationship. No, I whispered. That's not possible. He would have told me. Mark doesn't lie to me. Even as I said it, the words sounded flimsy, a child's defense against a monster under the bed. The note in Chloe's hand, Amelia's smug smile, it was all starting to make a horrible kind of sense. "I'm so sorry, Clara," Chloe said, her voice thick with emotion. She reached out and took my hand, her fingers warm and steady around my cold ones. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you. I never wanted to hurt you. But when you showed me that note, I couldn't let you go on not knowing." I just stared at her, my mind reeling. "How do you know this?" I asked, my voice numb. "How are you so sure?" Chloe sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "My cousin Sarah. She went to the same university as Mark. She was in a few classes with Laura. She knew them as a couple. When you and Mark first got serious, Sarah mentioned it to me. She said, 'Isn't that the guy who was practically married to Laura?' At the time, I just assumed she was exaggerating. I didn't think anything of it. But now," her voice trailed off, but she didn't need to finish. "Now, it was everything. It explained the coldness from Amelia. It explained the way Mark's mother sometimes looked at me with a strange, appraising expression I could never quite decipher. It explained the note. I wasn't just the new wife. I was the replacement." "Why wouldn't he tell me?" I whispered, the question aimed more at the universe than at Chloe. "Why would he lie about something so big?" Chloe squeezed my hand. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe he was ashamed. Maybe he was afraid it would scare you off. Or maybe—" She hesitated again. "Maybe what?" I pressed, needing to hear the worst of it. "Maybe he's not over her." Chloe finished softly. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "He's not over her. He loved her first." The two sentences connected in my mind, forming a terrible, undeniable truth. My husband, the man I had married just hours ago, was in love with someone else. Or at least he had been. A love so deep and so long that he had to erase it, to pretend it never existed, just so he could be with me. I felt a surge of nausea. Was I just a consolation prize? A convenient way to mend a broken heart? The thought was humiliating, a deep burning shame that spread through my entire body. I pulled my hand away from Chloe's and stood up, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "I can't believe this," I said, my voice rising with a hysterical edge. "I just married him. I stood up in front of everyone we know and promised to spend my life with him. And it was all a lie." "Clara, calm down," Chloe urged, standing up as well. "We don't know the whole story. There has to be a reason." "The reason is that he's a liar," I snapped, whirling to face her. "He's a liar and his family knows it. They've been watching me, probably laughing at me this whole time. Amelia certainly has been." The image of Amelia's triumphant smile flashed in my mind, and a hot, pure anger began to burn through the shock and hurt. She had wanted to destroy me with that note. She had wanted to ruin my life. I stopped pacing and took a deep, shuddering breath. The tears were gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I would not let them break me. I would not be the weeping, hysterical bride. I would not be their victim. "What do I do?" I asked Chloe, my voice now steady and low. She looked at me, her expression shifting from pity to a fierce, protective loyalty. "First," she said, her tone practical, "we get through tonight. You go downstairs, you grab your new husband, and you leave. You go on your honeymoon. You pretend that everything is perfect." "Pretend?" I asked, incredulous. "How can I pretend?" "Because you need time," Chloe explained, her voice firm. "You can't confront him now. Not like this. You're emotional. He'll deny it. He'll gaslight you. He'll turn it around on you and make you feel like you're the crazy one for listening to a bitter sister-in-law. You need to be smart about this, Clara. You need a plan." She was right. A public confrontation at my own wedding would be a disaster. I would look unhinged. They would all close ranks around Mark, and I would be left alone, the hysterical bride who couldn't handle a little family drama. I needed to be calm. I needed to be strategic. I needed proof. Okay, I said, nodding slowly. Okay, a plan. What kind of plan? Chloe walked over to me and put her hands on my shoulders, forcing me to look at her. You go on your honeymoon. You watch him. You listen. You gather information. Don't let him know that you know anything. Be the loving, happy newlywed. And while you're doing that, I'll do some digging on my end. Sarah will talk to people. We'll find out what really happened between Mark and Laura. We'll find out why they broke up. We'll get you the whole story. And then, when you have all the facts, you can decide what you want to do. Her words were a lifeline in the swirling chaos of my mind. A plan. It was something to hold on to. It gave me a purpose beyond just surviving the night. I could do that. I could pretend. I had been pretending for hours already. What was a few more weeks? He's going to notice something is wrong, I said, a flicker of doubt returning. I'm not a good actress. You're a better actress than you think, Chloe said with a small smile. And he'll be so wrapped up in the honeymoon bliss he probably won't notice anything. Men are oblivious about these things. Just smile, be affectionate, and ask him questions. Innocent questions. About his college days, about his friends. See what he says. See if his story changes. I took another deep breath, steeling myself. Okay, I said again, my voice stronger this time. Okay, I can do that. Good, Chloe said, giving my shoulders a final squeeze. Now, fix your face. We're going to go downstairs and you're going to find your husband. You're going to give him the most brilliant smile he has ever seen. And you're going to tell him you're ready to leave. I went to the mirror and looked at my reflection. My eyes were red-rimmed, my face pale beneath the makeup. I looked like a ghost at my own feast. But as I stared at myself, I saw something else flicker in my eyes. Determination. Amelia had meant for that note to be an ending. I would make it a beginning. The beginning of her and Mark's downfall. I took out my compact, powdered my nose, and reapplied my lipstick. When I turned back to Chloe, the heartbroken bride was gone. In her place was a woman with a mission. Let's go, I said. It's time to say goodnight. The 2-week honeymoon in Hawaii was the longest, most excruciating performance of my life. Every moment was a test of my resolve. Mark was attentive and romantic, planning sunset dinners and scenic hikes. He seemed completely oblivious to the storm raging inside me. He would reach for my hand, and I would have to fight the urge to flinch. He would kiss me, and I would have to force myself not to pull away, all while the words, "he loved her first," played on a loop in my mind. On our 3rd day, as we were lounging on the beach, I decided it was time to begin my quiet investigation. I needed to lay the groundwork, to see how he would react to the first gentle probe. I shaded my eyes with my hand and looked at him. He was reading a book, a contented smile on his face. He looked like the man I had fallen in love with, and for a terrifying second, I wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding. But Chloe's words and the certainty in her eyes kept me anchored to my purpose. Hey, I said, my voice casual. I was just thinking about something funny. He lowered his book. What's that? He asked. It's silly, I said with a light laugh. But we've never really talked in detail about your exes. I know there weren't many, but was there ever anyone even remotely serious before me? Like high school sweetheart serious? I held my breath, watching his face for any flicker of discomfort. His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. It was a tiny change, one I would have missed a week ago. But now I was watching him with the focus of a hawk. Not really, he said, his tone a little too dismissive. I told you, it was just a few flings here and there. Nothing worth talking about. Why do you ask? He was shutting it down. Just as Chloe had predicted, I had to be careful not to push too hard. No reason, I said, waving a hand airily. Just honeymoon thoughts, thinking about our whole lives, past and present. I'm just so glad you're my first and only everything. The words were syrupy sweet, designed to disarm him. It worked. His expression softened, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Me too," he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "You're it for me, Clara. You know that." I smiled at him, a perfect, loving smile, while inside I felt a cold knot of certainty forming in my stomach. He was lying. And he was good at it. A few days later, I tried a different approach. We were driving along the coast, the windows down and the warm, salty air filling the car. I had been deliberately cheerful all morning, making him laugh, being the carefree woman he thought he had married. I waited for a comfortable silence before I spoke again. "You know, it's funny," I began, as if a thought had just occurred to me. "My cousin Chloe was asking me about your college days. Her own cousin Sarah went to the same university. Did you know her? Sarah Jenkins?" I watched his hands on the steering wheel. They didn't tighten, but his knuckles went white for a split second. Another tell. "The name sounds vaguely familiar," he said, his eyes fixed on the road. "It's a big school. I probably crossed paths with her." "She said she remembered you," I continued, keeping my voice light and breezy. "She said you were quite the item with some girl back then. She couldn't remember her name. Said you two were inseparable." I was walking a tightrope. I needed to see if he would offer up the name himself. If he would offer up any piece of the truth. He was silent for a long moment, so long that I thought he wasn't going to answer. "College was a long time ago," he said finally, his voice flat. "People have weird memories of things. It was probably just some girl I dated for a semester. Honestly, I barely remember it." It was a different lie this time. The first time it was nothing serious. Now it was, I barely remember it. He was actively erasing her, burying her deeper and deeper. The inconsistency was a blaring alarm bell in my head. He wasn't just hiding a past relationship, he was protecting a secret. And he was willing to lie repeatedly to do it. The anger I had felt on my wedding night came rushing back, cold and sharp. I wanted to scream at him, to call him out on his pathetic, transparent lies. But I held my tongue. It wasn't time. I didn't have enough ammunition yet. I just smiled and changed the subject, talking about where we should stop for lunch. For the rest of the day, I was the perfect wife. But that night, as he slept soundly beside me, I decided it was time to escalate my investigation. It was time to find the proof he thought he had buried. I slipped out of bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. I took his laptop from his travel bag and carried it into the large, spa-like bathroom, closing the door as silently as I could. I sat on the cool tile floor, the laptop warm on my knees. My hands trembled as I opened it. The login screen appeared. A password. Of course. I thought for a moment. What would his password be? I tried my birthday. Nothing. I tried his birthday. Nothing. I tried the name of his childhood dog. Nothing. Then a thought occurred to me. A cold, sickening thought. With a shaking finger, I typed in the name Chloe had given me. Laura. The screen unlocked. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I had to put a hand on the floor to steady myself. His password was her name. Her name, after all these years. After marrying me. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that I couldn't breathe for a moment. He had whispered my name in his vows, but her name was the key to his private world. I sat there on the cold floor, the glow of the screen illuminating my face, and felt something inside me break. The hurt was so immense, it was almost physical. But then, the anger returned, hotter and more focused than ever before. This wasn't just about a past love anymore. This was a current obsession, a sickness. I took a shaky breath and forced myself to focus. I had to use this opportunity. I didn't know how much time I had. I started searching. I looked through his documents, his emails, his browser history. Nothing immediately incriminating. He was careful. But then I found it. A link to a cloud storage service, a folder labeled Archives. My hand hesitated over the trackpad. Did I really want to open this Pandora's box? I knew that once I did, there was no going back. There would be no more pretending, no more blissful ignorance. I would know the truth in all its ugly detail. I clicked the folder. It was full of subfolders, each one labeled with a year. I started with the oldest one, from 7 years ago. It was filled with hundreds of photos. And there she was. Laura. She was beautiful, with long dark hair and a radiant smile. She and Mark were in every picture, their arms around each other, their faces pressed close. They were on vacation, at parties, at family gatherings. They looked so happy, so deeply in love. It was the kind of love you see in movies, the kind of love that feels predestined. I clicked through the years, a silent, horrified witness to a life I had never known existed. I saw them moving into their first apartment, a small, cluttered space filled with mismatched furniture and beaming smiles. I saw them at Mark's graduation, his arms slung proudly around her shoulders. I saw them at Christmas with his family, Laura wearing a sweater that matched Mark's, looking completely at home. Amelia was in some of the photos, standing next to Laura, her arm linked through hers, smiling a genuine, happy smile. She had loved Laura. Of course she had. The final folder was dated 2 years ago. The photos were fewer. The smiles seemed a little less bright. And then there were no more folders. The timeline just stopped. This must have been when they broke up. I felt a strange, hollow victory. At least they weren't still together. But the victory was short-lived. I went back to his email, my hands moving with a new, grim purpose. I searched for her name. Laura. Most of the emails were old, from years ago. Love notes, inside jokes, plans for the future. Each one was a tiny dagger in my heart. But then I found something recent. An email from Amelia to Mark, sent just a month before our wedding. The subject line was, "You need to be careful." My blood ran cold. I clicked it open. The email was short and to the point. Mark, you need to be more careful. Clara is smarter than she looks. If she ever finds out the real story about Laura, she'll leave. You can't let that happen. Mom and Dad would be devastated to have another wedding called off. Just keep your story straight and get through the ceremony. Once you're married, it will be too late for her to do anything about it. I read the email 3 times, the words burning themselves into my brain. Another wedding called off. That meant Mark and Laura had been engaged. They had planned a wedding. And his family, his sweet, supportive parents, and his venomous sister, they had all conspired with him to hide it from me. They had coached him, encouraged him to lie, just to get through the ceremony. I wasn't a bride to them. I was a problem to be managed. A placeholder to ensure there was a wedding, any wedding, to avoid the family shame of a failed engagement. The laptop screen blurred as tears of pure rage filled my eyes. I wasn't just a rebound. I was a prop in their pathetic family drama. A pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. I closed the laptop, the soft click echoing in the silent bathroom. I stood up, my legs stiff and unsteady. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. Her face was pale and tight, her eyes dark with a pain so deep it was terrifying. But beneath the pain, there was a fire, a cold, controlled inferno. They thought I was a fool. They thought they could manipulate me, use me, and discard me. They had underestimated me, and they were about to find out just how badly. I wiped my tears, my movements precise and deliberate. The honeymoon was over. It was time to go to war. The next morning, I woke up before Mark. I lay in bed, watching the sun rise over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. It was beautiful, but I felt nothing. The beauty of the world seemed distant, like something happening on a screen. All I could feel was the cold, hard knot of betrayal in my chest. I had a choice to make. I could confront him now, here in this beautiful, expensive hotel room. I could scream and cry and throw his lies in his face. I could watch him squirm and deny and eventually, maybe, confess. Or I could follow Chloe's advice. I could bide my time. I could gather more information. I could build my case until it was so airtight, so undeniable that he and his family would have no choice but to crumble under its weight. I thought of Amelia's email. Get through the ceremony. Once you're married, it will be too late for her to do anything about it. They thought they had me trapped. They thought the piece of paper we had signed, the public declaration of our vows, was a cage. They were wrong. It was a weapon. And I was going to use it against them. I made my decision. I would play the long game. I would not give them the satisfaction of a hysterical breakdown. I would be calm. I would be methodical. I would be ruthless. When Mark finally stirred, I turned to him with a bright smile. "Good morning, sleepyhead," I said, my voice light and cheerful. "I was just thinking we should do something special for our last day here." He blinked the sleep from his eyes and smiled back at me, completely unsuspecting. "Anything you want," he said, pulling me close. I let him kiss me, my body rigid for a split second before I forced myself to relax, to melt into him the way a loving new wife should. It was repulsive. It felt like I was betraying myself with every second I pretended, but it was necessary. "I want to go to that little town we passed yesterday," I said. "The one with all the art galleries, and I want to buy something beautiful to remember our honeymoon. Something for our new home." "That sounds perfect," he said, his voice warm. He had no idea that the home he was imagining was a fantasy. He had no idea that the woman in his arms was already planning her escape. He had no idea that I was not shopping for a memory, but for a trophy, a symbol of my victory. We spent the day being the perfect couple. We held hands as we walked through the town. We browsed the galleries, and I made a big show of admiring the art. I finally settled on a large, abstract painting, a swirl of blues and greens that reminded me of the ocean. It was expensive, more than we should have spent, but I insisted. "We have to have it," I said, looking at Mark with wide, pleading eyes. "It will be the centerpiece of our living room. It will be the first thing we bought together as a married couple." He couldn't refuse. He paid for it with the joint credit card, the one linked to the account where his parents had deposited the generous check for our house down payment. As he signed the receipt, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. It was their money, after all. It seemed only fitting that I use it to buy a monument to their deceit. That night, back in our room, I packed my suitcase with meticulous care. I folded my clothes, arranged my toiletries, and placed the small framed photo of me and Mark from our nightstand face down at the bottom of the bag. I was compartmentalizing my life, packing away the lie I had been living. While I was packing, I received a text from Chloe. "Call me when you have a chance. I have news." My heart leaped. I waited until Mark was in the shower, the sound of the water a cover for my clandestine call. I took my phone and slipped out onto the balcony, closing the glass door behind me. "What did you find?" I asked, my voice low and urgent. "You were right," Chloe said, her voice grim. "It's even worse than we thought. I talked to Sarah. She talked to a few of her old college friends, people who were close to Mark and Laura. They didn't just break up. It was a huge, dramatic implosion." I gripped the railing of the balcony, my knuckles turning white. "What happened?" "Laura got a huge career opportunity," Chloe explained. "A job in London. It was her dream. She wanted Mark to go with her. She assumed he would, but he refused. He said his life, his family, his job, it was all here. He couldn't just uproot everything for her." "So he chose his life here over her?" I asked, a strange flicker of something I couldn't name passing through me. "It's not that simple," Chloe said. "According to Sarah's friend, Mark's parents, especially his mother, were a big part of it. They never wanted him to move. They were very traditional. They put a lot of pressure on him to stay, to build a life here. They told him if Laura really loved him, she wouldn't ask him to leave. Of course, his mother, the sweet, gentle woman who had cried at our wedding, she had been pulling the strings all along. So Laura left for London and they broke up, I said, piecing it together. And Mark was devastated. Devastated doesn't even cover it, Chloe said. He was a mess for months, and their wedding, Clara? It was already planned. They had the venue booked, the caterer, everything. They had to call it all off just 3 months before the date. It was a huge source of shame for his family, especially for his mother. Amelia's email echoed in my mind. Another wedding called off. It all made sense now. The desperation to see Mark married, to erase the public humiliation of the first failed attempt. I was the solution. The Band-Aid for their wounded family pride. There's more, Chloe said, her voice dropping even lower. Sarah's friend said that Amelia has always blamed Laura for breaking Mark's heart, but she also idolized her. She thought Laura was perfect, and she never thought any other woman would be good enough for her brother. And she said Amelia keeps in touch with Laura. I felt a jolt, as if I had touched a live wire. She what? She keeps in touch with her, Chloe repeated. Sends her messages on social media, likes her posts, tries to keep the connection alive. Sarah's friend thinks Amelia is secretly hoping that Laura will come back from London one day and get back together with Mark. The audacity of it was breathtaking. The sheer, calculated cruelty. Amelia had given me that note, not just to hurt me, but as a statement of her allegiance. She was Team Laura, and she wanted me to know that I was just a temporary fixture, an obstacle in the way of the real love story. And Mark? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Does he know Amelia is in touch with her? I don't know, Chloe admitted. But Clara, you have to consider the possibility that he does. You have to consider the possibility that he's not just passively mourning a lost love. He might be actively waiting for her to come back. The thought was the final, crushing weight. It reframed everything. His lies weren't just about hiding the past. They were about preserving the future. A future with Laura. He had married me, but he had left the door wide open for her to walk back through. He had secured a wife, a home, a life, all while keeping his options open. I was his backup plan, his safety net. The fury that rose in me was so potent, so absolute, it burned away every last vestige of love I had ever felt for him. There was nothing left but a cold, desolate landscape of betrayal. And in that landscape, a single, clear thought emerged. I was not going to be his safety net. I was going to be the storm that tore his whole world apart. Thank you, Chloe, I said, my voice eerily calm. This is exactly what I needed to know. What are you going to do? She asked, a note of concern in her voice. I'm coming home tomorrow, I said. And I'm going to set a trap. Amelia is arrogant. She thinks I'm a fool. She's the weak link in this whole chain of lies. And I'm going to make her sing. Be careful, Clara, Chloe warned. Don't do anything rash. Don't worry, I said, a thin, sharp smile touching my lips. I'm not going to be rash. I'm going to be brilliant. I ended the call and stood on the balcony for a long time, looking out at the dark, churning ocean. The beautiful, romantic honeymoon was over. Now the real games would begin. The flight home was silent. I put on my noise-canceling headphones, leaned my head against the window, and pretended to sleep. Mark tried to talk to me a few times, to hold my hand, but I gave him a sleepy, dismissive wave and closed my eyes again. I couldn't bear to look at him. I couldn't bear to hear his voice. Every word he spoke was a lie. Every touch was a betrayal. I needed the silence to think, to plan. By the time we landed, my strategy was fully formed. It was simple, elegant, and cruel. Just like Amelia. We arrived at our new house, the one we had moved into just a week before the wedding. It was full of unopened boxes and wedding gifts. It was supposed to be the backdrop to our new life together. Now, it felt like a stage set for a tragedy. Mark was full of energy, talking excitedly about unpacking, about where we would put the furniture. I let him talk, nodding and smiling at all the right moments. I'll start unpacking the kitchen, I said. Why don't you go pick up some groceries? The fridge is completely empty. Good idea, he said, kissing the top of my head before grabbing his keys. I'll be back in an hour. The moment the door closed behind him, I went into action. My plan had two parts. The first was to secure my evidence. I went to his study, opened his laptop, using Laura's name as the password, a fresh sting of pain and anger fueling me, and found the email from Amelia again. I forwarded it to a new secret email address I had created just for this purpose. Then, I went to the cloud storage. I downloaded a dozen of the most damning photos. Mark and Laura kissing, celebrating an anniversary, posing with his family. I saved them all to a folder on my new email account. Finally, I took out my phone and took a screenshot of the laptop's login screen, the password hint clearly visible. It was all there, a neat little package of his deceit. The second part of my plan was more delicate. It involved Amelia. I needed to get her to confess, and I needed to get it on record. I took a deep breath and composed a text message to her. Hi, Amelia, I wrote, my thumbs moving quickly. Now that the wedding craziness is over, I was hoping you and I could get together. I feel like we got off on the wrong foot, and I would really love for us to be friends. How about lunch this week? My treat. I hit send before I could lose my nerve. For a few agonizing minutes, there was no reply. I imagined her reading it, laughing at my pathetic attempt to curry favor. Then, my phone buzzed. I'd like that. Her reply read, How about Tuesday at the Ivy? Of course. The most expensive, fashionable restaurant in town. She wanted to make sure I knew my place. Perfect, I texted back. See you then. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait. The next few days were a masterclass in deception. I was the perfect doting wife. I unpacked boxes, organized the kitchen, and talked endlessly about our future. I asked Mark for his opinion on paint colors and curtains. I made his favorite meals. I was so convincing that even I sometimes forgot I was acting. But at night, after he had fallen asleep, I would lie awake in the dark, my mind sharp and clear, going over my plan again and again. I was living a double life. In the daylight, I was Mrs. Clara Thompson, happy newlywed. In the darkness, I was a woman sharpening her knives, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Tuesday arrived, a bright sunny day that felt like a mockery of the dark task ahead. I chose my outfit carefully. A simple, elegant dress, expensive but not flashy. I wanted to look confident but approachable. I wanted her to underestimate me. I arrived at the Ivy a few minutes early and secured a quiet corner table. I took out my phone, opened the voice recorder app, and placed it on the table next to my purse, partially hidden by a napkin. It was a risk, but a necessary one. Then I waited. Amelia arrived exactly on time, looking impossibly chic in a designer pantsuit. She surveyed the restaurant with a proprietary air before spotting me and gliding over to the table. Clara, she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. You look, well. You too, Amelia, I said, my own smile equally artificial. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. We made small talk for a few minutes, ordering our food, talking about the wedding, about the gifts. Amelia was in her element, dispensing condescending advice about how to handle her parents and what was expected of me as Mark's wife. I listened patiently, nodding and smiling, playing the part of the eager-to-please sister-in-law. I was letting her feel superior. I was letting her get comfortable. Finally, as the waiter cleared our main course plates, I saw my opening. I leaned forward, my expression earnest and slightly conspiratorial. Amelia, I said, my voice low. Can I ask you something? It's a little bit awkward, but I feel like I can trust you. Her eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. She loved being the keeper of secrets. Of course, she said, leaning in as well. I took a deep breath. It was showtime. It's about Mark, I said. He told me the funniest story the other day about one of his college ex-girlfriends, a girl named Laura. He was laughing about how intense they were, how they thought it was true love. It's so sweet that he can look back on it now and just laugh. I watched her face. It was like watching a series of masks fall away. First, there was confusion, then a flicker of disbelief, and finally a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. She actually scoffed, a small, ugly sound. "Laugh?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Oh, honey, no one is laughing about Laura." It was the exact reaction I had hoped for. She had taken the bait. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice full of wide-eyed innocence. I widened my eyes, playing the fool. He seemed to think it was all very silly and long ago. Amelia leaned back in her chair, a smug, pitying smile on her face. She thought she was about to educate the clueless little wife. She had no idea she was walking straight into my ambush. "Clara, you have to understand," she said, her tone patronizing. "Laura wasn't just some silly college girlfriend. She was the love of his life. We all thought they were going to get married. Frankly, my parents and I are still shocked that he ended up well, with you." The insult was so blatant, so perfectly cruel that it was almost beautiful. It was exactly what I needed. But I had to keep her talking. "Wow," I said, my voice breathy with fake surprise. He really downplayed it. "Why did they ever break up then? If they were so in love?" Amelia sighed dramatically, as if the memory was a great burden to her. "She broke his heart," she said. "She got a job in London and she left him. He was completely devastated. He was a wreck for almost a year. He only started dating you to try and forget her. He told me so himself." Boom. There it was. The confession. The confirmation of my deepest, most humiliating fear. And it was all being recorded. I had to fight to keep my expression neutral, to keep the triumphant rage from showing in my eyes. He told you that?" I whispered, letting my voice tremble just enough. "That he only dated me to get over her?" "Of course he did," Amelia said, now enjoying herself immensely. "I'm his sister. He tells me everything. Look, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just telling you the truth. You need to know what you've gotten yourself into. Mark's heart has always belonged to Laura. It probably always will." She was on a roll now, drunk on her own perceived power and my apparent weakness. I decided to push for the final damning piece of information. Is he still in touch with her?" I asked, my voice barely audible. I looked down at my hands as if I was afraid to hear the answer. Amelia let out a small, cruel laugh. "He's not supposed to be," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But yes, they email sometimes. Nothing serious, just checking in. He's hoping that one day she'll get tired of London and come home. We all are, to be honest." She sat back, her speech finished, a look of supreme satisfaction on her face. She had done it. She had told the little nobody the truth. She had put me in my place. She had no idea what she had really done. I looked up at her, my eyes wide and full of manufactured tears. "Thank you, Amelia," I whispered. "Thank you for being so honest with me. It's a lot to take in, but I'm glad I know the truth." She gave me a patronizing pat on the hand. "Of course, dear," she said. "That's what family is for." I excused myself to the restroom, my legs feeling shaky but strong. I locked myself in a stall and took a deep, shuddering breath. I stopped the recording on my phone and saved the file, labeling it The Truth. I had it. I had everything. The photos. The email. And now, a full confession from the architect of my humiliation, recorded in crystal clear audio. The game was over. All that was left was the checkmate. When I returned to the table, I was composed. The tears were gone. I was polite and distant for the rest of the lunch. I paid the bill, again with their money, and said my goodbyes. As I walked away from the restaurant, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in weeks. The weight of the uncertainty was gone, replaced by the cold, heavy certainty of my purpose. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. They had mistaken my love for foolishness. They had thought I was a pawn, but a pawn that makes it all the way to the other side of the board can become a queen. And the queen is the most powerful piece in the game. I spent the next 2 days in a state of calm, focused preparation. I contacted a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman Chloe had recommended. I had a consultation over the phone, laying out the basic facts of the situation. I didn't show her my evidence yet. I just wanted to understand my options. Based on what you're telling me, the lawyer, Ms. Davis, said, "You have a very strong case for an annulment on the grounds of fraud. The concealment of a prior engagement and the misrepresentation of his feelings and intentions constitute a deception that goes to the very heart of the marriage contract." The word fraud was music to my ears. It was the perfect legal term for what they had done. Ms. Davis also gave me advice on the financial aspect. The money his parents gave you for a down payment is currently in a joint account. Is that correct? She asked. Yes, I said. Then my advice is to move half of that money into a private account in your name only, and to do it immediately, she said. Legally, as a marital gift, half of it is yours. Secure your half before he has a chance to move it all. I followed her advice that very afternoon. I went to my bank and transferred my share of the gift into a new account that Mark had no access to. It felt like the first real step toward my new life. I wasn't just planning my revenge anymore. I was building my escape. With my legal and financial ducks in a row, it was time to plan the final act, the confrontation. I knew I couldn't do it alone with Mark. He would lie. He would cry. He would twist my words until I was the villain. And I couldn't just do it with Amelia. She would deny everything and play the victim. No, I needed an audience. I needed all of them in the same room. I needed to confront the entire conspiracy at once. The perfect opportunity presented itself that evening. Mark's mother called. "Clara, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We were hoping you and Mark could come over for dinner on Sunday. We haven't seen you since the wedding, and we're dying to hear all about the honeymoon." It was perfect, a command performance. They wanted to see how well their plan had worked. They wanted to admire their handiwork, the happy couple they had cobbled together out of lies and desperation. "We would love that, Diane," I said, my voice equally sweet. "We'll be there." After I hung up, I turned to Mark. "Your mom invited us for dinner on Sunday," I said with a smile. "Isn't that nice?" "Great," he said, oblivious. "It'll be good to see them." "Will Amelia be there?" I asked, my voice casual. "I assume so," he said. "She's usually there for Sunday dinner." "Good," I said, more to myself than to him. "I have something I'd like to talk to all of you about." Sunday arrived. I spent the day feeling strangely calm, like the air before a thunderstorm. I chose my outfit with the same care I had for my lunch with Amelia. A simple black dress. I wanted to look serious. I wanted to look like I was in mourning. When we arrived at Mark's parents' house, the scene was exactly as I had imagined. His father, Tom, was grilling in the backyard. His mother, Diane, was fussing over the table. And Amelia was lounging on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, looking bored and beautiful. They all greeted me with hugs and air kisses. The picture of a loving family. The hypocrisy was so thick I could barely breathe. We made it through the pre-dinner drinks and small talk. I answered all their questions about the honeymoon with vague, pleasant answers. I was a smiling, placid surface, while underneath my rage was simmering, waiting to boil over. Finally, we were all seated around the dining table. Tom had just served the steaks. Diane was passing around a bowl of salad. The conversation was light and cheerful. It was the perfect moment. I put down my fork and knife, the soft clink of silver on china cutting through the chatter. Everyone looked at me. I had their full attention. I turned to my mother-in-law, Diane, and smiled a cold, tight smile. "Diane," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Before we eat, I've been meaning to ask you something. I've been so curious. Could you tell me about Laura?" The name dropped onto the table like a stone into a silent pond. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Tom, who had just been taking a bite of steak, froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. Diane's hand, which had been reaching for the salt, snapped back as if she had been burned. Amelia's face, which had been a mask of bored indifference, went completely pale. And Mark just stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of panic and disbelief. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. It was Diane who broke it, with a weak, fluttering laugh. "Laura," she said, her voice a high-pitched squeak. "I'm not sure I know anyone by that name, dear." It was a pathetic, desperate lie, and it was all the confirmation I needed. "Oh, I think you do," I said, my voice losing its pleasant edge and taking on a hard, steely quality. I turned my gaze to my husband. "Mark, why don't you help your mother remember? Laura, 5 years, the apartment you shared, the wedding you had planned." "Clara, what are you doing?" Mark hissed, his voice low and urgent. "This is not the time or the place." "Oh, I disagree," I said, my voice rising. "I think this is the perfect time and the perfect place, because you're all here. All the people who helped you lie to me. All the people who thought I was a fool." I swiveled my head to look at Amelia, who was now staring at her plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. "Amelia," I said, my voice sharp as a razor, "you were particularly helpful. You told me just the other day that Mark only married me to get over Laura. You told me he still talks to her. You told me you're all just waiting for her to come back from London." "I never said that," Amelia shrieked, her head snapping up, her eyes wild with panic. "You're making that up. You're a liar." "Am I?" I asked softly. I reached into my purse and took out my phone. I didn't turn it on. I didn't play the recording. I just held it in my hand, my thumb resting on the side button. I let my eyes drift from Amelia's terrified face to Mark's, then to Diane's, then to Tom's. "Should we listen to our lovely lunch conversation from Tuesday?" I asked the silent room. "I have it right here. I'm sure we'd all be interested to hear you, in your own words, telling me that my entire marriage is a sham." Amelia's face crumpled. A choked, strangled sob escaped her lips. She knew she was caught. There was no way out. Tom was staring at me, his mouth agape, his face a mask of horrified shock. Diane looked like she was about to faint. And Mark looked broken. "Clara, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Don't." The please was not for forgiveness. It was a plea to stop the bleeding, to hide the wound from his parents. It was a plea for me to continue the charade even now. That was the moment I knew for certain that there was nothing left to save. I ignored him. I stood up from the table, my movements calm and deliberate. I looked at the three of them, the architects of my pain, and I felt nothing but a cold, empty pity. They were so small, so pathetic in their lies. "I came here tonight for one thing," I said, my voice ringing with a terrible finality. "The truth. And since none of you seem capable of telling it, I'll just have to ask a direct question." I locked my eyes on my husband, the man I had loved, the man who had shattered my heart into a million pieces. "Mark, I want you to look at me, in front of your family who helped you deceive me, and answer one question. Do you love me? Or am I just a placeholder? A warm body in your bed until Laura decides to come back?" The room was utterly silent. The only sound was the frantic ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. Mark stared at me, his face a mess of conflicting emotions. I could see the panic, the guilt, the desperation. But I could also see the truth he was trying so desperately to hide. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just stared at me, his eyes pleading. And in that hesitation, in that terrible, damning silence, I got my answer. He couldn't say it. He couldn't say he loved me, because he didn't. Not in the way that mattered. Not in the way that was real. A slow, sad smile touched my lips. I see, I said softly. I placed my napkin on the table, a final, formal gesture of farewell. I will not be a placeholder in my own life, I announced to the room. I will not be a footnote in someone else's love story. I looked at Amelia, whose face was stained with tears of self-pity. I have the recording, Amelia. I looked at Mark. I have the photos from your secret folder. I have the email. I have everything. I let that sink in for a moment before delivering the final blow. I have also spoken to a lawyer. I will be filing for an annulment on the grounds of fraud first thing tomorrow morning. Diane let out a horrified gasp. Annulment? She whispered. Fraud? Yes, fraud, I said, turning my cold gaze on her. The kind of fraud that involves a whole family conspiring to trick a woman into a marriage under false pretenses just to save face after a previous failed engagement. I wasn't finished. I had saved the worst for last. And since this marriage was based on a lie, I think it's only fair that all the wedding gifts be returned to the people who gave them. That includes the very generous gift you and Tom gave us for a house down payment. Don't worry, I've already taken care of it. I've secured my legal half and my lawyer has frozen the rest of the joint account. You'll have to talk to her if you want to see any of that money again. That was the kill shot. The mention of money, the threat of legal battles, it hit them where they lived. Tom finally spoke, his voice a low growl. You can't do that. Watch me, I said. I looked at Mark one last time. He was just sitting there, defeated, his head in his hands. He looked pathetic. I felt nothing. No love, no hate. Just a vast, empty indifference. Goodbye, Mark, I said. Then I turned, and without another word, I walked out of the house, leaving the ruins of my marriage and their carefully constructed world collapsing behind me. I didn't run. I walked, my head held high. The cool night air felt clean and fresh on my face. It was the first breath of my new life. It was the breath of freedom. The first person I called when I got to my car was Chloe. I didn't even say hello. The moment she answered, I just said, "It's done." I told her everything. I recounted the entire dinner, every word, every reaction. I told her about the frozen bank account, the annulment, the look on their faces when I walked out. When I finished, there was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then, Chloe let out a long, low whistle. Wow, she said. Just, wow. You are my hero. I laughed. A real, genuine laugh. It felt rusty, like a piece of machinery that hadn't been used in a long time. I don't feel like a hero, I said. I just feel empty. That's the shock, she said, her voice warm and reassuring. The adrenaline is wearing off. But listen to me, Clara. You did the hardest, bravest thing. You stood up for yourself. You refused to be a victim. That makes you a hero in my book. Her words were a balm on my raw nerves. What do I do now? I asked, my voice small. Where do I even go? You come to my place, she said without hesitation. My guest room is all yours for as long as you need it. I'll make tea. We'll watch terrible movies. We'll eat ice cream. And tomorrow we'll start planning the rest of your amazing mark-free life. Tears filled my eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude. Thank you, Chloe, I whispered. I don't know what I would do without you. You'll never have to find out, she said. Now get over here. The next few days were a blur of practicalities. I stayed with Chloe, wrapped in the safe cocoon of her friendship. She let me cry when I needed to cry and made me laugh when I needed to laugh. She was my rock. I met with Ms. Davis in person and handed over my file of evidence. The recording, the emails, the photos. She listened to the audio from the lunch with Amelia, her expression growing colder and more determined with every word. When it was over, she looked at me and said, "They don't have a leg to stand on. We will get you the annulment and we will make sure they don't see another dime of that down payment. The inevitable call from my parents came. I had been dreading it, but I knew I couldn't put it off. I told them everything, from the note at the wedding to the disastrous Sunday dinner. They were silent for a long time after I finished. Then, my father's voice, thick with a barely controlled rage, came on the line. "That boy," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm going to have a talk with him." "No, Dad," I said quickly. "Please don't. It's over. I'm handling it. I don't want any more drama. I just want it to be done." It took some convincing, but he finally agreed to let me handle it my way. My mother just cried, her heart breaking for mine. "I'm so sorry, baby," she sobbed. "You deserve so much better." "I know, Mom," I said, my own voice thick with tears. "And now I'm going to get it." Mark tried to contact me, of course. He called, he texted, he emailed. The messages were a pathetic mix of apologies, excuses, and accusations. "I love you, Clara. I was just scared. You didn't have to blow up my family like that. Can we please just talk?" I ignored them all. I blocked his number. I blocked his email. I blocked him on all social media. I was erasing him from my life, just as he had tried to erase Laura. But after a week of his relentless digital barrage, I decided he deserved one final, definitive answer. I unblocked his number and waited for him to call. It didn't take long. "Clara?" he said, his voice full of a desperate hope that made my stomach turn. "You answered." "I'm going to say this once, Mark," I said, my voice cold and devoid of all emotion. "So you better listen carefully. Do not contact me again. Not by phone, not by text, not by email, not through your family or our friends. We have nothing to talk about." "But I love you," he pleaded. "I made a terrible mistake. I know that now. I was just so confused and hurt about Laura, and my family put so much pressure on me. I handled it all wrong, but I want to be with you." The excuses were so pathetic, so self-serving that I almost laughed. "You didn't make a mistake, Mark," I said, my voice like ice. "You made a choice. You chose to lie to me every single day for 2 years. You and your family chose to build our entire relationship on a foundation of deceit. You didn't love me enough to give me the truth then, so you can't possibly love me enough to fix this now. It's over. We are over. Have a nice life." Before he could reply, I hung up and blocked his number again, this time for good. There was no anger left, no sadness, just a profound and complete indifference. He was a stranger to me now. A few weeks later, I got an unexpected text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hi, Clara. It's Ben, Mark's cousin. I just wanted to say I'm so sorry for how everything went down. For what it's worth, I always thought you were too good for him. Amelia is a snake, and Mark is a coward for letting her and his mom run his life. I hope you find someone who deserves you." The message was a small, unexpected kindness in the midst of all the ugliness. It was a confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that the toxicity of that family was real, and that at least one person on the inside could see it. I texted back a simple, "Thank you, Ben. I appreciate that." It was a small crack of light in the darkness, a reminder that not everyone was complicit. The annulment was granted a few months later. It was a clean, swift legal process. The fraud was so blatant, so well documented that the Thompson family's lawyer advised them not to fight it. I was legally, officially, no longer Mark's wife. I had never been. The marriage was declared void, a legal fiction. I got to keep my half of the down payment, and the rest was returned to his parents, minus Ms. Davis's substantial fees. I used the money to put a down payment on a small, sunny apartment in a new part of town, a place that was all mine, a place with no ghosts. I spent the next few months rebuilding my life. I filled my new apartment with furniture that I chose, with art that I loved, including the big, abstract ocean painting from Hawaii, which I hung in my living room as a reminder not of a failed honeymoon, but of my own strength. I focused on my work. I spent time with my friends. I reconnected with myself, the person I had been before I had gotten lost in Mark's lies. It was a slow process, but with each passing day, I felt a little stronger, a little more whole. About a year after the wedding that wasn't, I was having coffee with Chloe at our favorite cafe. I was telling her a funny story about a new client at work, and I was laughing, a deep, genuine belly laugh. In the middle of my laugh, I caught my reflection in the window of the cafe. I saw a woman who looked happy. Truly, deeply happy. The sight was so surprising, so wonderful, that I stopped laughing and just stared. "What is it?" Chloe asked, a smile in her voice. I turned back to her, my own smile wide and bright. "Nothing," I said. "Everything." I thought back to that horrible day, to the small piece of paper that had turned my world upside down. Amelia had given me that note to break me. She had wanted me to know that Mark had loved Laura first. She had wanted me to feel second best, to feel like a pale imitation of the real thing. But she had failed. Her cruel little act of sabotage had not destroyed me. It had liberated me. It had forced me to see the truth, to fight for myself, and to build a life that was infinitely better than the lie I had been living. She had wanted to teach me a lesson about my place in Mark's heart. Instead, all she had done was teach me how to love myself most. And for that, in a strange, twisted way, I would be forever grateful. The check came, and I reached for it, pulling out my own wallet. I was paying my own way now, and I was finally, truly free.